بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله الذي لا يبلغ مدحته القائلون ولا يحصي نعماءه العادون ولا يؤدي حقه المجتهدون، الذي لا يدركه بعد الحمام ولا يناله غوص الفطن، ثم الصلاة والسلام على أشرف الأنبياء والمرسلين، حبيب قلوبنا وطبيب نفوسنا والشفيع ذنوبنا، سيدنا ومولانا أبي القاسم محمد. اللهم صل على محمد وعلى آل بيته الطيبين الطاهرين المعصومين المظلومين، لا سيما بقية الله في الأرضين، صاحب العصر والزمان، خليفة الرحمن إمام الإنس والجان، ولعن الله أعداهم أجمعين إلى يوم الدين. أما بعد، فقد قال الله وقوله الحق. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. ولا تكونوا كالذين نسوا الله فأنساهم أنفسهم أولئك هم الفاسقون. صلوا على محمد وآل محمد.
اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد.
My beloved brothers and sisters in Islam, Assalamu alaikum jami'an wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. It is my pleasure and my honor to be with all of you once again here in your beautiful city of Seattle. As Brother Ali had mentioned, the last time we met, I think it's been over a year now. And it's nice that I have 3 days with all of you and 3 nights with a certain topic in mind. And we get the opportunity to spend a little bit more time than we did last time together. Before we begin into our topic, I wanted to talk a little bit about the month of Rajab. As many of you know, we are now a week into this beautiful month, and the season of spirituality has begun in the Islamic calendar. Every calendar has certain seasons within it. For example, in the Gregorian calendar of January to December, the educational year begins in September, ends in June. The financial year or the accounting year, of course, has its own certain months. The Islamic calendar is no different. Although we begin in Muharram and end as Al-Hijjah, the spiritual season, the Fasli Ibadat as it's called, begins in the month of Rajab and ends, of course, with the month of Ramadan. These 3 months are vital for our development spiritually. There are moments in the year where spiritually we progress at a very slow rate. And sometimes we stall, and sometimes we lax. And sometimes we get spiritually lazy. Then there are moments in the calendar where we boost our speed. Our foot is on the pedal. We're flying through this mountain of spirituality. These 3 months are those months where our spirituality is boosted. Many different amal, many different events and functions. Many of our Ahlul Bayt are born and they are martyred in these next few months. We, of course, had last night, the first Thursday night of the month of Rajab, known as Laylatul Raghaib, a beautiful night, a very powerful amal. And those of you who, of course, perform that amal, may Allah accept that amal. We have Amal Dawood coming up, of course, the 15th of Rajab, and of course, so on and so forth. So please, I ask myself, and we beg Allah for tawfiq to be able to benefit from these beautiful days. Do not forget this haqir in your du'as, inshallah. Use these days to elevate yourself towards Allah, inshallah. Sallu ala Muhammad wa ala Muhammad. The topic that's been announced is a revival of the spiritual or the soul, the revival of the soul as we call it. It's a 3-day lecture series. And we will start off today by talking about what the problem is. Then tomorrow and Sunday, inshallah, we'll look at possible solutions. We have become individuals who are obsessed with signs. We look at every event, especially nowadays, happening in the news in the Middle East, as a sign for something. We try to analyze the death of a certain prince, let's say, as a sign for something else. We analyze a certain color of a certain flag of a certain group, meaning to be something else. We analyze the invasion of a country that may mean something else. And while we are able to sit there and pick up these signs and sometimes even incorrectly analyze these signs, we become obsessed, especially when it comes to the zuhur of the Imam. The arrival of our Imam has become an obsessive topic for us. Alhamdulillah, that's a great sign. The problem is that we are obsessed with this checklist of signs. I kid you not when I tell you that I know people who have a small book in the back of their pocket, and every time one of the signs of his arrival are done, they check it off. And they tell themselves 2 more signs, 3 more signs, and then he'll arrive. And sometimes we incorrectly, like I said before, analyze these events to mean that his arrival is imminent. And we even go down to the calculation. We pull out these traditions from the books that tell us when Abdullah passes away in Saudi, there's only X amount of days until the arrival of the Imam. And on the calendar we put the red X until, of course, the arrival of the Imam comes. Or if we see black flags everywhere, that of course means some hadith by Imam Ali that said about the black flags. Yemen right now is being crushed by the Saudi regime. That means something. And we become obsessed with science. And the ulama are telling us constantly that, look, forget about the signs outside of you and begin obsessing with the signs inside of you. All of the signs could come true. Your checklists in the back of your pocket all have checks on them. But if we're not ready, it doesn't make sense. Has no bearing on us. The zuhur will come, fly right past us, and we'll be stuck wondering, wait a second now, I thought I was ready. I had the signs checked off and everything. I carried a book with me, man. That's how ready I was. The problem is that sometimes in this process of us analyzing all these signs, we neglect the biggest sign of all, being ourselves. The ulama say, forget about everything outside of you. That's going to happen. That's bound to happen. It's supposed to happen. Don't be one of those, as the Quran said and the ayat I read for you in the khutbah, to be those who have forgotten themselves because they have forgotten Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And we'll examine that a little bit tonight. The first point I want to make is that sometimes when we need a shake-up, we need a revival, we need something, someone to come and kind of jolt us and spark us, sometimes the biggest culprit is nobody else but us. We have solutions for everybody. This is a very key point I want to myself first and then to all of you. We have solutions for everybody. We think about what's happening, let's say, in Palestine, and we have a solution for that. We think about what's happening right now in Yemen, we have a solution for that. We look at this community and that ummah and that family and that individual, we have solutions for everybody, mashallah. That brother, if you just do this, you'll solve your issue. Sister, just do this, you'll solve your issue. The one person we don't have a solution for is ourselves. No idea. Sometimes we're lost. And in that idea of being lost, we fall into spiritual complacency. A deep slumber. We become okay with where we're at. We become okay with who we are. And while others talk about progression, when it comes to ourselves, our progression is lost in the shuffle. So what do we need? We need a revival. We need a reintroduction. A shake-up, a shuffle, a spark, a slap across our face sometimes. To say, look, wake up. Everything else around you is moving towards the zuhur of the Imam. Literally, you can tell right now, the world is moving towards the arrival of our Mahdi. If before you had doubt, now you shouldn't have any doubt right now. It should be very clear to you by now which forces will oppose the Imam and which forces will stand beside the Imam. The point of these next 3 nights is not about those forces, it's about us inside of us and reviving ourselves. The dangerous part is that the Quran talks about various groups, and this is the beauty of the Quran. All of you are with me, inshallah? The problem with serving snacks before the speech is that you enjoy the Pringles more than you enjoy the speaker. You guys have had your snacks? Everyone is good? You had your coffee? Yes? Yes? صلوا على محمد وعلى محمد please. The Quran is very beautifully guides us. And I ask myself, I ask all of you, I don't know how many of you read the Quran on a regular basis. But make it a practice for yourself to read a few ayat of the Quran with translation. Watch how your life changes. The traditions tell us 50 verses a day. 50 might be a lot for us. Let's start with 5. Those of you who have families, spouses, and children, it's a beautiful, beautiful atmosphere when you and your family sit together and one individual reads one verse, the next individual reads another verse. It's a beautiful circle of the Quran. 10 minutes it takes, 5 verses. The Quran guides in very beautiful ways. It tells us not only is the path of success this, it gives us examples of tribes, nations, individuals even, who have attained success. Why? So you can simply follow them. Don't reinvent the wheel. Don't be distraught. Don't think, oh my God, where do I start? No, just forget all that. We'll do you one better. We'll tell you about individuals, nations, families, parts of the world that either failed in their mission or were successful in their mission. All you have to do is do what? Just repeat what they did or avoid what they did, depending on who they are. When Imam Ali is giving a will to his son, Imam Mujtaba alayhi salam, he's saying to him, very simple, examine the life of those who lived before you. Don't stress yourself out. Those who have failed, avoid their mistakes. Those who have been successful, repeat their mistakes, imitate them, emulate them, follow them. The Quran is no different. In one area, the Quran talks about general ingredients for success. For example, in Surah Ma'idah, it says, Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, Ya ayyuhalladhina amanu. So you and I, inshallah, is referring to. اتقوا الله وابتغوا إليه وسيلة وجاهدوا في سبيله لعلكم تفلحون. If you want to be amongst those who are successful, 3 ingredients: taqwa, wasila, jihad. Taqwa is piety. Wasila is this idea of connecting to Allah through another source. And jihad is struggle, strive, fi sabilihi, in his path. It's very general, okay. Let's go one notch higher. It talks about individuals who have been successful. For example, in Surah Tahrim, it talks about wives of prophets who should not be emulated. For example, the wife of Nabi Nuh or the wife of Nabi Lut. But in verse number 11, it talks about one woman. And her story is beautiful. And that one woman is the wife of Fir'aun, who's considered to be one of the 4 noble women in our deen. Her story is amazing. صلوا على محمد وعلى محمد.
اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد.
Pringles. Can't compete with Pringles, man. Yeah. During the Holy Prophet's time, and I'll get to Bibi Asi in a second. When the Holy Prophet announced his prophethood when he was 40 years old, before the announcement of his prophethood, there was a man in Mecca who used to support the Holy Prophet. Support in the sense of, sometimes when he needs something, he would come and help out the Prophet. As a friend, as an aide, as a person who would be beside him. Sometimes giving his house for a night, sometimes assisting him with goods. When the Prophet of Allah announced his prophethood, and this movement of Islam began to expand across the peninsula, a friend of this individual who used to help the Prophet pre-prophethood would go and whisper in his ear, do you recognize this individual who was calling himself the Prophet of God? He goes, yeah, of course I do. He goes, are you not the one who used to support this man? Help him out, assist him? He goes, yeah, that was me. He goes, if I were you, I would go and remind him who you are. Because right now, he is the center of this momentum. He's the main guy behind this entire movement. This movement is catching fire now. It's destroying the likes of Abu Sufyan and others around him. The man approaches the Holy Prophet and says, do you recognize who I am? He says, yes, of course I do. Do you remember what I did for you before this whole Prophet of Allah thing started? He says, yes, I do. And the Prophet knew that he has come to remind me, and now he's asking for a price. He says, I will forever be grateful for what you've done for me. If you wish to be compensated for everything that you've done, name your price. What would you like? And the man has a list of X amount of animals, X amount of trees, this amount of land, blah, blah, blah. And the Prophet gives him whatever he wanted. And then the Prophet turns to his companions. Please follow me. And says to the companions, if only this man asked what the old woman during Prophet Musa's time asked for. Let's go to Prophet Musa's time. What did she ask for? Prophet Musa is leading this tribe of the Bani Israel out of Egypt, away from the clutches of Fir'aun. They're attempting now to leave the city, and they get lost on the way. They get lost on the way. And they have a little meeting, and the senior members of the tribe remind Nabi Musa that our forefathers promised Nabi Yusuf that when you are to leave Egypt, you are to take my body with me. I don't want to be buried here in Egypt. He says, we forgot to do that. That's why we're in this predicament. So if we can somehow locate the body of Nabi Yusuf and take it with us, we'll find our way. Nabi Musa announces to the entire tribe that who here knows where the body of Nabi Yusuf is buried. Old woman comes to the front and says, I know where he's buried, but it'll cost you. It's okay, no problem. Recall in your mind what that man asked the Prophet of Allah. What is she asking of Nabi Musa? She says, look, I'm old, I want my youth back, number one. Number two, because of my old age, my legs don't function as well, I want my legs back. Number three, I want to be raised on the day of judgment with you, Nabi Musa. It's a hefty price for a body, right? What does Nabi Musa say? He says, sure, no problem. And she was granted all these three things. Where are the camels and the date trees and the pieces of land that man asked the Prophet of Allah? And where is being elevated with the Prophet of Allah? Two different ideologies, two different requests. Let's go one notch higher to Bibi Asiya. In the Quran, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala uses her as an example for who? ضَرَبَ اللَّهُ مَثْلًا لِلَّذِينَ آمَنُوا. Allah uses the example of this woman for who? لِلَّذِينَ آمَنُوا, for those who have iman. Amra'ata Fir'auna, the wife of Fir'aun. What did she ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for? Look at the courage now of Bibi Asiya. إِذْ قَالَتْ رَبِّي إِبْنِ لِي عِنْدَكَ بَيْتًا فِي الْجَنَّةِ وَنَجْرِ مِنْ فِرْعَوْنَ وَعَمَلِهِ وَنَجْرِ مِنَ الْقَوْمِ الظَّالِمِينَ. Look at what she's asking for. Look at what that man asked the Prophet of Allah. Look at what that woman asked Nabi Musa. Look at what Asiya is asking Allah directly. Oh Allah, I want in heaven a house indaka, close to you, beside you. I want to be freed from Fir'aun and what he does. I want to be freed from this unjust nation. It's one thing where you ask for heaven, right? It's one thing where you ask for a house in heaven. It's one thing where you ask to be a neighbor of God in heaven. That's a whole different ballgame altogether. That's a whole different level altogether. You have to have a lot of courage to ask Allah, look, Allah, I don't want any ordinary house in heaven. I want to be in the same street as you in heaven. If I'm 74, I want you to be 72 on that street. And Allah is using this request as an example for us, the believers. I mean that when you enter the world of Islamic certainty, when you begin to tread the path of Allah, when you avoid forgetting about yourself, you have the opportunity to ask for the impossible in front of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And because of that certainty, He makes the impossible possible. Certainty, yaqeen, the idea of believing what you believe in without any sort of a hiccup is very important. But if our souls are forgotten, then that yaqeen also fades away. On the flip side, the Quran also describes people who we should not be as well. While there are people, nations who the Quran describes as being successful, individuals like Bibi Asad who's been successful, on the flip side there are those the Quran describes who you should not be. One of them is the ayat that I read for you in the khutbah, وَلَا تَكُونُوا كَالَّذِينَ نَسُوا اللَّهَ فَانْسَاهُمْ أَنفُسَهُمْ. Don't be like those, the Quran says. Don't be like those individuals who have forgotten Allah, and because they have forgotten Allah, Allah has made them what? Forget about themselves. أُولَٰئِكَ هُمُ الْفَاسِقُونَ. They are amongst those who are the transgressors. It's one thing where you forget about Allah, I get that. We sometimes commit sins, right? We make mistakes. We stumble, we trip, we fall. And in that process we forget about God. For that moment where our shahwa, our desire overtakes us, God is a second thought. He's pushed to the corner. When we want His forgiveness, we bring Him back from the corner and say, look God, my bad, I messed up, I'm sorry, please forgive me. God says, sure, I'll forgive you, no problem. But in that moment where we are committing sin, God's not part of the equation. We've forgotten about God. But what happens when we forget about ourselves? What does that even mean? Let's examine this a little bit in further detail. Sallu ala Muhammad wa ala Muhammad.
Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ala Muhammad.
I'll give you a very simple example about those who forget about themselves. I want you to imagine that you are in a new city. You don't know the roads, you don't know much about the city at all. You have a couple of friends in that city. You go and visit that city. You are sitting, let's say, in the masjid there. You are surrounded by the 2 or 3 people that you know. There's a stranger that comes up to your friends and says, look, I'm having a program at my house tomorrow night. Can you guys all please come to my house? And bring your new friend as well with you. And you guys, amongst the 3 of you, decide that, look, we'll each take our own car and we'll follow each other on the way. You don't have a cell phone, you don't have a GPS, you have nothing. All you have are your friends who you will follow to this guy's house. You begin your journey the next day. All of you pull out together, you're behind these 2 cars, everything is good. Halfway through the ride, these guys take off on you. They drive too fast, you can't keep up. Happens sometimes. And now all of a sudden you're stuck. You have no idea where those guys are. You have no service in your phone. You have no GPS. You don't even have a number, an address, nothing. Now all you are left with are your whims and what you might think is right. You start to take over. You start to think to yourself, okay, I know this guy lives in this area maybe. Let's make a left here, make a right here. And you start to think that maybe I should be going this way when really I should be going that way. And the margin of error of you being lost increases. Because now that guide that you were with are long gone. You are by yourself, you're on your own. And you are making up the route as you go on. A left here, a right here, maybe straight here, U-turn here. You're completely lost. You have no idea what's happening. And you start to say things like, I think I should make a right here. I think this, I think that. And what you believe is correct takes over. Because there's no guide there to begin with. They're long gone. Sometimes we live our life like that when it comes to our deen, our religion, especially nowadays. We find some of our youth questioning the very fundamental principles of our religion. And this idea, well, I think it should be this way. I think it should be that way. That's why the ulama say that now, in this day and age, there are two different Islams that are coming about. One Islam is inside of our head that we think is Islam, and one is in our books that is the actual real Islam. And the gap between the two, unfortunately, is growing further and further apart. And we end up playing now with God's kingdom. We end up trying to make sense of the Sharia, especially when it comes to issues like domestic issues, like women's rights and men's rights, like husband's rights and wife's rights, like issues in the family, like khums sometimes, like marajiyat, for example. All these different things that now has become a controversial topic. We've taken upon ourselves what we believe the Sharia should be like. What it actually is, I don't know. But if it was me, it should be like this. That majlis sitting in some cave in the East, in Iraq and Iran, has no idea what life is like in the US, and now he's dictating to me what I should do and what I shouldn't do. Doesn't make sense to me. I've had individuals come to me, no word of a lie, have come to me and told me that I have made khums haram on myself. Absolutely. Why? It's a money laundering system for the ulama. I feed their rich lifestyle, their brand new cars and their brand new phones and their brand new watches, and their vacations and their ziyarah trips. I fund that through my khums. It's not getting where it should be. So I've made it haram on myself. And they tell me as an FYI, I'm just letting you know. I go, thank you very much for letting me know. But this is where we're at today. Because when you separate yourself from the actual root of that deen, you're left with what you think is right. And that you thinking is right sometimes is our own destruction. And we got to be careful a little bit. We fall into traps now. We start to question things that shouldn't be questioned. And we start to actually tell ourselves that unless and until I am explained properly why I'm doing this act, I'm not going to do this act at all. In Toronto, I have had many, many debates with many, many young individuals over many cups of coffee until 2 o'clock in the morning. My throat becomes dry, my hat comes off, my sleeves are rolled, one verse after one verse, one hadith after one hadith, one proof after one proof. After all of that, they sit there and say, okay, well, I'll think about it. I'll let you know. Thank you very much. Because until I'm convinced, I'm not going to do it. And that's our downfall. That's when we have separated ourselves from our guide. And that's what Quran talks about. Don't be like those who have forgotten themselves. Imam Ali in Najib al-Agha describes the process of submission very beautifully. It says, Al-Islam huwa al-taslim, wal-taslim huwa al-yaqeen. Islam is first submission. Submission is then certainty. We, and I'll include myself with all of you, we have it reversed sometimes. We think first is certainty, and then is submission. Islam says no. The moment that you enter the circle of La ilaha illallah, the moment that you have denied every other existence out there, and you have accepted Allah to be the only one who's worthy of your worship, you become the slave of Allah. And the slave does not question the master. Now granted, I will say this, you don't enter that area of Tawheed unless it makes sense to your aql. I'm not talking about blind faith here, guys. I'm talking about the fact that you are now convinced, using your common sense and your logic, that one God exists. You've qualified Him, you've quantified Him, you submit to Him. Now whatever comes down from Him, you say labbaik, nothing else. If Allah grants you with a little bit of understanding as to why you're doing what you're doing, great. It's not a prerequisite to submit to God. It should be enough that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said this is wajib, Chash, it's wajib. If he says it's haram, no problem, I won't do it. If it makes sense to me or doesn't make sense to me, it's not a prerequisite. But in this day and age today, I've had a lot of youth come together and come forward with this ego about them. Convince me, teach me, explain to me why I'm doing it. Don't tell me to do it, tell me why I'm doing it. Your limited understanding is trying to understand the wisdom behind the unlimited source. Eventually there'll be a disconnect. And the further you go along this idea of this ego of ours, the further we are separating ourselves from our own selves. We become individuals who have forgotten themselves. And the revival process becomes almost wajib on us. In khutbah number 193 in Nahj al-Balagha, Amir al-Mu'mineen talks to Hammam. Hammam is a very famous companion. Khutbah al-Muttaqeen is also called Khutbah Hammam. He comes to Amir al-Mu'mineen and says that Mawla, explain to me who the pious ones are. Very famous khutbah. Imam Ali gives him a verse of the Quran, a very general idea, those who fear Allah are those who are pious, and tries to suffice him with that answer. Hammam says, no, I want more. And then of course this beautiful khutbah begins. The very first portion of that khutbah, he explains to Hammam that Allah has brought down our Sharia to us, not for His own kingdom. It's not like if we collectively decide tonight to become the best servants of Allah, that His kingdom will expand on the arsh of Allah. Or, na'udhu billah, if we decide now to run from the deen and leave Islam, that He will crumble. No. He's abad, He's azal. He was there when we weren't there, He'll be there long after we're gone. What we do doesn't affect His kingdom. It's His grace, His lutf. He's latif, right? He's gracious. It's His grace that He has taught us what is haram and what is wajib. For our own development, not for His. Now for us to have this ego about ourselves that, look, convince me, that's our downfall. He says Islam is taslim, submission. In that submission, you'll find certainty. First, submit. If it doesn't make sense to you, it will make sense to you. In the darkness of that submission, if we're doing something without understanding it, a door will open that you never even imagined a door to be there to begin with. And now all of a sudden, the light of understanding will begin to develop inside of you. The Quran says that those who have taqwa, Allah will create a makhraja for you, an outlet for you. وَيَرْذُقُ مِنْ حَيْثُ لَا يَحْتَسِبْ. He'll give you risk from a source that you never even accounted for. And sometimes we think risk is money, right? We lose a job, we get distraught, and now a source that we never thought existed comes and offers a job. That's great. But risk sometimes is not just money. Risk can be this idea of submission to Allah as well. If we're stuck, Allah will grant us the source that we never even thought was there. So the part of the problem that we have is our own ego. This idea of what I think the deen should be like. I kid you not, last summer, during the month of Ramadan, I don't know how things are here, but in Toronto, we have long fasts there. Suhoor is around 2:30, Iftar is around 9:30. Okay? It comes almost an 18-hour fast. In the summertime. Sometimes, of course, the weather reaches around 90 plus, so it becomes a difficult fast, no doubt. A man comes to me and says that, Syed, I just don't think this is the way the Prophet wanted us to fast. It's too hard. 18 hours of a fast, this is ridiculous. I mean, no insan can take this amount of difficulty. And I reminded the man with respect, of course, he was much older than I was. I said, look, we go based on a lunar calendar. The beauty of a lunar calendar is that there came a time when you fasted in the winter time. Where your suhoor was at 6 a.m. and your iftar was at 5 p.m. It was a 10, 11-hour fast. Those days were very easy. He says, no, but that's the way the fast should be. So he's asking me now to go back to the Hausa and to go talk amongst your teachers and find out some average hours of fasting. I think 12 to 13 should be good. 18, 19 hours is outside of our capacity. This is what I mean by people who are trying to sit there and say, I think, I wish, if it was up to me. This is what happens when you separate yourself from the guidance of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. You become individuals who believe that my version of Islam is the correct one. This whole discussion on modernism and Islam, it's a very good one. It's a good discussion. Allama Tabatabai completely destroys that discussion altogether. It's funny how the face of Islam changed from pre-9/11 to post-9/11. Post 9/11 now, for the past, 12, 13 years after 9/11, all of a sudden now these fundamental principles of the deen that were there for 1400 years before that event in New York happened, now after that event, for some reason, they're being questioned, debated, taken out of the deen sometimes. And this restructuring of the deen of Islam began to take place within our own circles, forget outside. We have articles written by academics and doctors and professors and these great big titles of Islamic teachings, Muslim doctors, Muslim reformers, Muslim thinkers and intellects who are looking, let's say, for example, to tell us that the hijab is an outdated form of Sharia. Up until 9/11, for 1400 plus years, the hijab was a beautiful mark of modesty. Now, post 9/11, it is the mark of enslavement all of a sudden. And this reform has happened, and this, of course, sparks a debate that is the Sharia of Islam even applicable in the West today in 2015? Or is it outdated? Does it require some tweaking? There are groups in the East who are trying to destroy the institution of marjiyat, saying we are free thinkers. Allah gave us an aql. We are aqil human beings. We have that source inside of us that differs us from every other creation. Why should we resort to somebody for our own salat and our own sawm and those furu of our deen? It's a big discussion. Big groups with a lot of money behind them are out there promoting this message. They're on YouTube and they're roaming around the country, and these guys speak beautiful English and they have nice accents and they're very appealing to the youth, and people are flocking to this idea. Let's be careful. Allama says that the discussion on modernism only happens with those things that are materialistic in nature. When the source of the deen of Islam is something called the fitrat, there's no question of something getting old or new. Right? A car gets old, you replace it. Your clothes get ripped up, you replace it. Your home gets out of date, you move to another home. The deen of Islam is not based on things that are materialistic in this world. The deen of Islam is based on the ma'anawiyah of this world. And that ma'anawiyah, that spirituality, is connected to the fitrat of Allah. How can we say that that, of course, becomes outdated? It's not. The love a mother has for her child never gets outdated. The cry for justice never gets outdated. It's been there from day number one, it's there today as well. The need to worship has been there from day number one, it's here today as well. When we revive ourselves, we have to first identify, have we lost ourselves or not? Ask yourself that question. Have I lost myself? Do I know where I'm at? You enter a mall, you're looking for a certain store. I get this example in Zainab a couple years back. You enter the mall, you're looking for a certain store. You go to the mall directory, which gives you a one-shot view of the entire mall, upper level, lower level. You're looking for that big red dot that says what? You are here. Based on where you know where you are, you know where to go. Up, down, left, right. If you don't know where you are in the mall, you'll be roaming around the mall for years and years to come. We're no different. We have to first know where we want to go. But before that, we have to know where we are. That dot on our directory that says you are here. How many of us in this room know where we are spiritually, where we should be? and how to get there. So inshallah, in these next 2 nights, we will look at this concept of reviving ourselves. We are becoming complacent Muslims now, guys. We've convinced ourselves that the amount that I do in the West is enough. And it's good enough as well. Don't expect any more from me. I live in the West, there are distractions. The fact that the fact that I haven't changed my name, the fact that I pray salat, I wear hijab, I do all these things, that should be enough. I come to the center, I have these programs, I do these programs. On Friday night, I could be anywhere. I'm here. That's enough. Don't ask me for anything more. We've convinced ourselves that we can't do anything more, and that has to be addressed. Sometimes we don't understand our own capacity, and that's tomorrow's discussion, inshallah. The way that Imam Ali describes us as this grand universe, our sickness inside of us, the cure inside of us, everything's inside of us, we just simply don't reflect. We don't look inside of us for the problems that we have. We look outside of us. And we become spiritually complacent, convincing ourselves that whatever I do is enough, and that's all that it takes. So any talk of Islah and reform and building yourself and elevating yourself, all that goes in one year, out the other. That's for somebody else, for the ulama, guys in the Qawm and Najaf, not for me, man. I barely make it through the day. If I pray my salat on time, it's a miracle. The fact that I fast and I work with my co-workers, it's a miracle. The fact that I have to wear sleeves in this summer and socks in the summer is a miracle. You're asking for more? Forget it. We convince ourselves that I can't do anything more. And that's where the complacency begins. And when you become complacent, the next hit is the sincerity of your acts. It becomes simply a habit. Salat becomes an item on our check-off list. Wake up, get dressed, drink a coffee, salat, go to work, have a meeting, come home. And that ruhi ibadat, the essence of worship, is now stripped from our worship. Sometimes we don't understand that that effect won't happen right away, it'll happen years down the road. Let's be careful. This world is rapidly changing itself. The picture of the zuhur of the Imam that was fuzzy and out of focus, let's say, for many, many years, now is slowly becoming into focus now. Every step, every day, every aggression that we hear about is one step closer to the arrival of our Savior. And before we know it, He'll be here, and we won't be ready for Him. And I fear God for that day. That He's here and we're not ready. And at that moment, we can't ask the Imam, look, Imam, just go back in the khaybar for 1 more week. Give me 7 more days and I'll prepare myself. He said, look, you've had years and years to do that. So inshallah, in these next 2 nights, we'll look at practical steps. I'm sorry if I come across as somebody who is negative. It's not about negativity. It's about an awakening. And I'm with you in this journey. We all need awakening. Tomorrow we look at the value of the human being, and more specifically the value of the youth in Islam. Then on Sunday we'll look at solutions, 3 or 4 different practical solutions to make sure that we don't fall into this trap, or to get ourselves out if we have fallen into that trap. Inshallah, we ask you Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to accept this qaleel ibadat, inshallah. We ask you Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to forgive the sins that we have committed, and forgive the sins of our parents, inshallah, in these beautiful months of Rajab and Sha'ban, the month of Ramadan, to accept our amal, give us tawfiq to not repeat our sins. We ask you, Allah, to weaken the hands of the enemies of Islam, to strengthen the mustaz'afin all over the world. And finally, Allah, we ask you, the one solution that we see for the crisis in Yemen, for those who are being killed in Pakistan, for our Iraqi brothers, our Palestinian brothers, our Afghani brothers, our Bahraini brothers. We ask you, Allah, the one solution that we see is the coming of the 12th Imam, to hasten that reappearance and to allow us the honor to be beside him during his mission. Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.